this brings us to the concept of realized strategy. Now, realized strategy, as we see on the right, is really a mix of deliberate strategy and emergent strategy. Deliberate strategy arises from intended strategies, whereas emergent strategies arise from observations. So, what Professor Mintzberg points out is that the purpose of strategic planning is to evolve realized strategies. The purpose of strategic planning is to ensure an intermingling of deliberate strategies and emergent strategies, which will give realized strategies. Let's look at the example of the Dabur Group. As part of their intended strategy, they had targeted UP again as one of their major markets, and they had intended to increase dealer representation in UP in order to increase their business activity in the state. At this point, some of their operational people requested their CEO to visit a small town in UP, to Gorakhpur, to visit Gorakhpur, which is a small town in UP, and see for himself the kind of differences that had occurred over a decade in Gorakhpur. Now, the CEO of Dabur, who had been visiting places in UP for several years, and who had traditionally found women with their heads covered and sitting in rickshaws and moving around, when he visited Gorakhpur, he found women, the same women, he found them sitting on scooters and motorcycles in jeans and moving around. So he realized that there was a fundamental change that had taken place in the market. Further, he found that Gorakhpur, which is a small town in northern UP, had 250 beauty parlors. So, this was a fundamental change that had taken place in rural UP. As a consequence of this visit, which was the result of inputs coming from below, as a consequence of this visit, Dabur decided to employ lady professionals, lady sales representatives, who would move around in rural UP and increase the penetration of their product. So, here was a case of emergent strategy coming up from observations. The deliberate strategy part, which was increasing dealer representation in UP, was modified to focus on the existing dealers, but to have a mix of dealers and lady representatives, right? So, here was a case where the intended strategy of dealer development became an unrealized strategy, and finally the realized strategy was a strategy which was a mixture of deliberate strategy and emergent strategy. This is why Mintzberg says that emergent strategy needs to be very carefully crafted. Now, crafted meaning it needs to be very deliberately built. It needs to be nurtured. It needs to be cultured, right? Let's look at what happens if you do not do this, right? But you focus on deliberate strategy alone, right? Now, a typical instance would be the public sector units in India. The PSUs in India, 90% of them use intended strategy, use the traditional strategy model, where there is a strategic planning team which produces a strategic plan, a 5-year strategic plan, and this strategic plan is then sent across the company to its various departments, and they produce departmental plans based on this plan. It's a completely top-down, top-driven approach. Now, the problem with this kind of approach is that it prevents learning from mistakes. See, when this top-down strategy is being implemented across the company, there is a lot of learning that takes place from the various experiences that this involves. However, there is no model in this strategy to incorporate this learning back into the strategy, back into strategy formulation. Let's look at emergent strategy if it is left all alone. Emergent strategy which is left all alone, right? Then what happens is that emergent strategy left all alone may result in critical mistakes. For instance, let's take the case of, let's go back 5 years, 2008. You had US investment banks, large, very professional US investment banks, whose operational staff found that there was a huge, maybe 20-25% of the US population who did not have their own houses, and this population was very keen on building their own houses, on acquiring their own houses. So they gave them loans to build houses, to acquire houses at low rates of interest. So this way the number of loans went up significantly, the interest rates were low, and there was tremendous growth. This was emergent strategy. But what happened? This strategy was not based on the capacity of that person who had taken the loan to repay the loan. And therefore, a few years later, banks started falling. And there was a financial crisis which took place over the last 4 or 5 years. And many countries in the world have still not recovered from that crisis. The United States itself, the United Kingdom, they are still suffering from that crisis. And that crisis came about because of emergent strategy which was left to itself. So what Professor Mintzberg says is that realized strategy must be crafted. Realized strategy must be crafted. It's a mixture of deliberate strategy and emergent strategy. For instance, here the US investment banks, the more senior people in these banks, right, should have curtailed the enthusiasm of the operational people to give loans. They didn't do that. So realized strategy is a question of a proper blend of deliberate strategy and emergent strategy.